I am a huge fan of the movies. I'm not talking about the experience of watching a film on the big screen while eating a bowl of popcorn covered in liquefied lard, much as I enjoyed that too. But instead, the 2005 release from Lionhead Studios that doubled as not just a robust management sim covering the ins and outs of running a movie studio, but as a genuine creative tool that allowed you to painstakingly construct a movie yourself using a variety of sets, costumes, effects, camera angles, filters, and more. The number of hours I spent with my friends creating short, extremely dumb movies about a man in the shower being stalked by a killer fish or something is immeasurable, especially when it allowed us to voice the characters ourselves. It was such a special experience, and tragically, at this point, is all but entirely lost to gaming history. Last time I checked, you couldn't purchase the movies on any digital storefront, and frankly, I have no idea where my physical copy is and if it would even work anymore. You know, assuming I'd buy a disk drive to actually install it. Fans of the movies like myself have had slim pickings since then, with nothing quite like it on the market since. So when I look to a game like Blockbuster Inc., it's hard not to get giddy. Not only does its trailer look like the modern iteration of the movies I'd sell someone else's firstborn child for, but the developers themselves profess to being huge fans of that game, clearly aiming to make one just like it for a modern audience. What could go wrong? Before I explain the numerous things that can go wrong, let me give a quick shout out to our Patreon. Subscribing will give you cool perks like free games depending on your membership tier, Discord community access, exclusive live streams, and more. And don't forget to join our very own gamer ghoul friend on twitch.tv/idreamofindiegames as she streams some of the latest indie titles. You can catch her there every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. The greatest indie gaming community in the world awaits you, not that I'm biased or anything. Lastly, we want to hear from you. Are there any games like the movies that you fondly remember but are no longer available for purchase? Tell us about them in the comments below. But for now, let's set some expectations around Blockbuster Inc. The Movies was a game of enormous scope. Philosophically speaking, expecting a 3-person development team to execute on its entire premise is a tall order. That's a small part of why this review of Blockbuster Inc. was one of the toughest I've ever had to do, because I know what it's aiming for and how difficult that is to achieve. But the much larger part of why this review was so hard to write is that Blockbuster Inc. is in its current state so fundamentally unacceptably broken that what it is now may have little in common with what it may ultimately become. Despite a stable presentation and solid performance in most cases, the actual gameplay systems here are, generously speaking, held together by toothpicks and used bubblegum. Oh no! Let's start with the piece most fans of the movies are likely chomping at the bit for, the creative one. As I mentioned earlier, the movies allows you to put together short, silly films with enough flexibility to make something, well, coherent if a few thousand notches shy of Oscar-worthy. So naturally, one of my first goals was to make the most interesting film I could manage within Blockbuster Inc.'s set of tools. The debut film of my budding production studio, Barely Magic Movies, was Barely Magic Murder, a crime drama taking place in a police station set custom built by yours truly. For reasons I'll attribute to one of Blockbuster Inc.'s most glaring flaws that I can't quite talk about yet, the only themes I had available to pick from for this film were a pirate theme and a vampire theme. Oh no! Alright, vampire police drama it is, even though there are no vampires in it. Whatever, who am I trying to impress? I set the budget to low because I only just started this studio and Jeff Bezos won't return my calls, set the age focus to PG, and hired a director, producer, and basically whatever actors were available. At this point, you can either let the game set up each scene for you, or go in and do a bit of tinkering yourself by hitting the direct scene button. The set I created in the cute but not quite robust set designer was a police station with a jail cell in one corner, a couple of police desks, and a bunch of chairs because criminals still have the right to sit, I guess. Maybe. I also costumed the two main actors as a cop and criminal, respectively, and gave them some appropriate gestures to use. Beyond this point, the creative possibilities essentially hit a brick wall, as its limitations became blatantly obvious. You can place actors in a scene, dress them up, and add some practical effects. You can give them a limited number of gestures and actions like angry shouting, casual chatting, or stunts like a sword fight or bar brawl, but the options are so limited that none of it is really going to be coherent, especially since there's never any dialogue. Actors can be assigned some standard animations that are usually related to one of the themes, but won't interact with anything in the set, and in this case couldn't even let me put my criminal in the jail cell I had set up for him, since the game just viewed that as two objects topics overlapping. So regardless of your efforts, most movies will be aggressively boring, with the process made a chore by a lack of some basic quality of life features. For example, if you make a blockbuster budget movie, it'll often have a dozen or more scenes with sets, animations, and effects that are needed for each. I couldn't find a way to just copy-paste one scene into another for natural transitions, and thus had to manually scroll to the right costumes, animations, and effects that I wanted for each character in every scene. This painstaking work doesn't seem to pay off either, neither in terms of the rating my movie got or how well it did at the box office. I got the sense that you get slightly better ratings for basic things like having the movie's themes match its genre and working with happy actors, but the simulation aspect is insultingly easy, to a degree that trivializes many of its systems. Why do anything beyond hitting the randomize button if you never make anything worth watching? Now, these are just the features of product creation that I'm talking about. I haven't even gotten to the bugs. Anytime I randomly generated a movie, many of the scenes wouldn't be assigned a set, so I had to go into the Sets tab manually to do so. Repeating the same sets between films lowers their appeal, but only when used consecutively. Thus, all you really need to do is switch back and forth between a few sets here and there to make this no longer a problem. They don't have to be relevant to the movie at all. I had one movie I self-proclaim as a highbrow art house title called The Splendid Hemorrhoid that was just a man standing around and occasionally shooting a gun in the middle of an empty room for its entire duration, and immediately raked in millions. The set assigning issue's annoying, but relatively minor. Less minor was when I couldn't make any subsequent episodes of a TV show past the pilot because the game would refuse to assign a set in each scene, but also refused to let me edit one in myself. Every TV show I made had to be cancelled after the pilot, so the actors must have been pretty pissed. I've hopefully established that between a bare-bones structure that makes it impossible to create an interesting, coherent short film, and major issues that can make it hard to create anything at all, filmmaking in Blockbuster Inc. is hardly a smooth process. That's before mention of the fact that there's almost no sound in the game, and I'm not sure if that's a bug. Seriously, aside from a few basic sound effects tied to certain events like a cha-ching noise when you make money or feedback from various menu buttons, the game's sound almost exclusively consists of its generic but passable music. The canteen has no eating or cooking sounds, that I heard anyway. The actors talk to each other but never speak in even so much as gibberish, and the filming process itself is completely mute. An immersive experience, it is not. There's a lot more to cover here, and unfortunately remains mostly in the realm of the very not good. But before I get into the nitty-gritty and shitty of the actual management and life sim aspects of the game, I should first give mention to the dark cloud hanging over Blockbuster Inc.'s entire design. Blockbuster Inc. doesn't so much have an explicit story as it does a sandbox mode where you build your studio, meet some goals along the way, and just kind of make your own story from there. That's totally fine. Not every management sim needs an underlying story, and most, as it stands, don't try too hard to begin with. But when you start, you select a decade spanning anywhere between the 1920s to the 2010s. I picked the 1920s to see how far I could progress, and that ended up being a big mistake, because the dark cloud, so to speak, is this. There's an issue that the developers are aware of where research in the game progresses at a snail's pace. In each studio, you'll hire researchers to gain research points that allow you to unlock things like new cameras, lights, effects, and other equipment as you progress through the decades, but mysteriously also allow you to unlock stuff like better meals for your actors and crew, new genres to work with, and features like a classroom to train your employees. It all sounds great, but most of these options, even the food upgrades for some reason, were not available in the 1920s, only in subsequent decades, and I not so quickly learned that progression through the decades feels about as efficient as trying to lose weight on a diet of pure chimichangas.
You totally blew it!
Just getting from the 1920s to the 1930s took hours of actual gameplay time, even if you spend most of the game with fast forward turned all the way up. So, while I appreciate the developers' awareness around the slow progression of research and willingness to fix it, I hope they realize how fundamentally broken it is, because in the 1920s era, not having research progress fast enough was hardly the problem. It was a problem, sure, but having research locked behind decades that are dozens of hours ahead of your current run is a much bigger one. I had a hugely successful studio where every movie was raking in millions of profit with little to no effort, and yet somehow I couldn't feed my superstar actors with anything but the lowest quality quality gruel because it apparently hadn't been invented yet. So I would argue the research feature is less in need of a quick bug fix and more in need of an entire reimagining from the ground up. This air of slipshod design is present everywhere in Blockbuster Inc., often making it difficult to tell what's a bug, what's a missing feature, and what's just poor design. There are a ton of features here. You have a build mode where you can design your own sets, create various offices and lounges for your cast and crew, add decorations, wallpaper, fencing, tiles, footpaths, plants, etc. Blockbuster Inc. wants to be the game where you can not only manage a film studio and customize its movies, but also design its look from the ground up to your heart's content and have to manage the needs of your various actors. And every single one of these mechanics is either poorly designed, bugged to hell, missing basic features, or just lacking any real purpose. For example, you can decorate your movie studio with seating areas, a swimming pool, and other minor luxuries. The possibilities aren't that extensive, but they're there. What escapes me though is why I would go through the trouble unless I really want to spend hours making my movie studio look great. None of it makes a difference. The cast and crew never use the seating areas I set up for them unless they're in the canteen or lounge. They never once use the pool, and decorations like fences don't have any quality of life tools you'd imagine they would, making me have to place sections of fence one by one next to each other in ways that made it seemingly impossible to make them contiguous. Decor aside though, the actual building tools are pretty decent and roughly what you'd expect from a Sims Light sort of experience. You can custom build any one of your offices, lounges, canteens, or otherwise, manually placing necessary objects in them through a fairly well organized list of submenus. Or you could forego the manual building process entirely and use pre-made templates for the rooms you need to build. But even these have problems. In the pre-made canteen, I constantly had my crew complaining that they couldn't navigate it properly, or saying they hadn't eaten a meal that day despite there being seating available and a cook on staff. I'm tempted to say that bug matters in the grand scheme of things, but in the game's current form, it really doesn't. I know I've mentioned it already, but allow me to elaborate on just how easy Blockbuster Inc.'s systems are to exploit. Aside from the short honeymoon period in the early game where you're learning the ropes and presumably believing its gameplay systems are more than just smoke and mirrors, the game is incredibly easy because not much that you do truly matters. Start with a low-budget movie, stick it out through the bad reviews, and keep making them. Maybe do some reshoots if you can afford it, then unlock higher budget movies through research. Or, hell, don't even start with a lower budget movie. Start with a loan from the bank at barely any interest and give yourself a leg up, a feature rendering the game's difficulty levels, seemingly just based on how little money you start with, all but completely pointless. Even when your movie is really bad, you're still likely to get at least one award at the annual ceremony, which raises hype for your next terrible movie and virtually guarantees profitability. By the time you're able to afford making blockbuster-sized films, you're basically set. The money rolls in, and as long as you keep your cast and crew happy enough, the score assigned to each scene will generally be at least passable. Keeping them happy is trivially easy too, even though the game often gives you no information whatsoever about what's making them unhappy. There were numerous times that my crew was below a 50% happiness rating, and the game told me there were no issues affecting their happiness. Occasionally I got a prompt to improve their food quality or move them into fancier housing, but only when they got especially miserable. And just like in real life, having money solves everything! So once you have enough of it, hey, move them into fancier housing. Let them work only 4 hours a day. Raise their salaries. I don't care. The Splendid Hemorrhoid made over $1 billion at the box office, so we've got money to burn. I could go on. I could talk about the tutorial, which is at least 40 minutes long, and I say at least because it wouldn't let me progress past the marketing section and I had to quit out. I could talk about the new game I started in the 2000s era and how it began with millions in research points that allowed me to unlock just about everything I wanted from the get-go. I could talk about how limited your hiring options frequently are and how the randomness of it may force you to hire an expensive A-lister right out of the gate if you want to hire any actors at all. I could talk about the bizarre random events that pop up, like the time robbers stole $20,000 from my studio and I was given a choice between telling the police to go find them or turning my story into a provocative documentary to gain fame. What was precluding me from just doing both things? Who knows? But let's be real, we only have so much time and I think you get the point. Blockbuster Inc. is a mess that is clearly a product of far too much ambition. Its visuals are kinda charming and Steam Deck support is passable despite requiring the need to map keyboard controls, but it's otherwise a huge jumble of poorly intersecting, imbalanced, and broken gameplay systems that has many months of patching ahead of it to even become a passable, you don't need the movies, we have the movies at home, quality experience. It's clear the developers are aware of some of its major bugs, but may or may not be aware of just how pointless they render most of the game when coupled with its large variety of underbaked systems. In a year or so, I could see Blockbuster Inc. being a sort of worthy, scaled-down version of its ambitious inspirations, but its current state is unacceptable, with virtually nothing in it worth doing once you get a feel for just how fragile its interconnecting systems are. This game was simply nowhere near ready to release, and accordingly, I can't recommend it to anybody. Blockbuster Inc. gets the dreaded Indie Krampus.
Motherfucker!